what this is. Hey, these are health forms. I found them in my folder right there. Talking about the Beatitudes. All right, Matthew chapter 5. Told you last week we talked about, or I briefly mentioned the Sermon on the Mount and all the teachings that Jesus he covers in Sermon on the Mount, and I strongly encourage people to study that, and because what Jesus deals with is everyday things, and you get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew chapter 7, he deals with the most important thing, which is our eternity. And but it kind of helps you become a well-rounded Christian by studying everything that he talks about. You'll see that he talks about the Ten Commandments in the Sermon on the Mount and in greater detail. Somebody might think, well, the Ten Commandments are outdated. And I can always say, well, no, the Ten Commandments are actually New Testament as well, because Jesus teaches about the Ten Commandments. So in the Beatitudes, remember, you may recall last week, every Beatitude starts with what? Blessed. Blessed. And what does that word blessed mean? Yeah, happy. Not an outward happy, but an inward happiness. It's a sense of satisfaction, and we're talking about our lives. Many of us we don't live satisfied lives because we're not blessed, because we don't live the way that Jesus lays it out for us right here, and it's all about our attitude, our spiritual attitude. And last week we did cover a couple of those, and you got a whole sermon. And even some of them make a whole sermon series out of just each different beatitude, because it covers so much in just a few short words. But if you'll recall last week, I like to break things into sections. It helps me to better explain it. And Beatitudes, thankfully, God did that in His Word. And Beatitudes are actually broken into sections. They are. You've got the first three, we started last week, which is basically talking about how to have our lives right with God. And what's the first one? He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? Y'all remember what it means to be poor in spirit? What does that actually mean? To see yourself as God sees. Poor in spirit means to be, actually means spiritual poverty. And you say that to somebody, they say, well, that can't be biblical because God doesn't want me spiritually poor. He wants our attitude of the heart to be spiritually poor. He don't want our lives to be that way and to live that way. But spiritually poor means that we give our lives over to God. And now we can see what we really are. God's able to show us what we actually look like. It's like looking in the mirror and we don't like what we see. So now that we're poor in spirit, we don't think that we're something that we're not. God can show us what we are. And then what's the next one? He says what? He says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Now what does that word mourn mean? To grieve over our sin. Now, what do you think God's going to do when we become poor in spirit and God shows us what He sees? What's He going to show us? Yeah, He's going to show us. If we want to see what God sees, He's going to show us the sin in our lives that maybe we ignore or maybe we don't want to face. And sometimes we don't even realize. Now we see that, and then He goes from that to what? Blessed are those who mourn. Mourn over what? Mourn over the sin in your life that now that you can finally see. You see how He's doing it? You see the process? And we're talking about how to have a life that's right with God. It's all, you see how there's no pride involved? You won't be poor in spirit, and you certainly won't mourn over sin in your life if you have pride. That's why God says, I hate it so much. So you have that, and remember, it's not a mourning over sin in your life because of what your sin has caused. The sins that you commit, do they sometimes really put a kink in your life? You ever say, I wish I wouldn't have done that because of what it's caused? You know, maybe it's caused problems at home, maybe it's caused problems with your job, maybe it's caused problems financially, and I wish I wouldn't. That is not what he's talking about. Those are the results of your sin. The mourning part is the fact that I have mourned against God. I have sinned against God. And that will actually take place when we see what God sees. Because you can tell somebody all day long, and we already know this, that there's nothing hidden from God, that there's nothing, no thought that we have, no word that we speak, no action we take that God does not see it. But it becomes real to us when we ask God to show us what He sees. You understand what I'm saying? It becomes real. It's like, man, you know, I did this, I did that, and He's a holy God. Look what He's done for me. You start to realize everything that you have because God is in your life, because Jesus Christ is your Savior. Now you're mourning in the right. I gave you the example of God's people in captivity. In the Old Testament, how they, when they went to they were overtaken by Babylon, and they were in a foreign land, and it says in the book of Psalm that God's people couldn't even lift up their voice in praise to God. They couldn't sing the song of God in a foreign land. And you get over into the book of Lamentation, it talks about the same thing, same situation there, and God tells them, guys, y'all got to search your heart. You've got to sit in judgment on yourselves. And they were mourning over the fact of what their sin had caused because they've been separated from their families. They've been taken to a foreign land and all these different things. Remember, that's a good picture of what, it's the opposite of what God's talking about. They prayed and they prayed and they prayed and they asked God to set them free, but He didn't do it. He wouldn't do it. And they didn't understand why. It's because they had yet to realize that they had sinned against God. They were more focused on what the sin had caused in their life. So we need to always remember that about sin. That first and foremost, we have sinned against a holy God, and that's when things really open up for us spiritually. And then he talks about, or that's where we left off with that one right there. Look at verse 4. Isn't that right? Yeah. Verse 5, I'm sorry. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the meek. That word meek, I would say, is probably one of the most misunderstood words in the whole Bible. What does it mean to be meek?
I think it is like humble.
Humble. That's a good, yeah. Submissive. Yeah.
People misunderstand it and think it means to be
Weak.
Let people run over you or not stand up for yourself and things like that. That's how kind of a lot of people look at it. And that's how I used to look at it.
It's kind of a synonym for humbleness, to being humble, but it's so much more than that. Meekness has a lot to do with humility. It actually means to have a gentle spirit. Trying to think of a good way to put it. You ever seen these guys that go out and break horses? I mean, I've always been fascinated with that because I grew up around horses and things, and some of them they weren't very nice at times. But we used to have some guys around here that used to break horses a lot. And you take a wild horse, I mean one that was stubborn and ornery and knew that it was more powerful than you, stronger than you, and you can watch that man break that horse, break its wheel, bring it to its knees. All of a sudden, now that horse went from something that was so rebellious. Now that horse has a gentle spirit. You ever heard somebody say that about a horse? I have many times. They say, "Oh, this horse has a very gentle spirit," and that's what they're saying. The horse is stronger. The horse is all these different things, but the horse is meek. And that's what that meekness is. And what it is, it's allowing God. It's a meekness that allows God to take over our lives. To completely have complete control, you got to be meek in spirit if that's going to happen. You can't be prideful. You can't be stubborn. You can't fight it or anything like that. And I tell you, one of the reasons why we see so many unhappy Christians in our day is because what are we doing? Well, we're trying to run our own lives and we're trying to do it our own way, and we've made a mess out of it. It's placing ourselves where we belong, which is under the authority of God. And without the meekness, you're not going to do that. But again, these Beatitudes, it's one thing for us to go through and me teach you what each one means. It's another thing to teach it in a way that we see a whole process here. And now we've gotten to this part, to the meekness part. So if you're going to live a life that's right with God, do you begin by trying to be a meek person? Is that how you started? So, well, I got to be meek. I got to be gentle in spirit. I've got to give God complete control of my life. Have you ever prayed for that? Have you ever thought, I need to do this? I have made a mess out of everything. I need to give it over to God. And there are many Christians who say, I'm good. I have finally given everything over to God, and they're so blinded by the fact that they haven't. I'm going to tell you, this is one of the hardest things there is to do. Because we are like wild horses. And if we don't humble ourselves like God says, God will break us like one of those wild horses. He will. But are there times in your life when you say, well, God's in control, but yet you step in God's way and try to make things happen? Or not happen? One of the best illustrations I've ever heard of that is how we go to the throne of God and we lay it at His feet and we walk away, and then when God's not looking, we come back and get it. That's what we do. Not every time, but a lot of times, and yet in our mind, we've given it to God, but we haven't. Now, how's one of the ways that, what is a meek spirit? And what I mean by that, again, is by giving God control of your life. Give me a good illustration of that, somebody. What would that look like? Let's just say you had something in your life that's really consuming you. You know you need to give it to God, and you say, I finally give it to God. I gave it to God. Now, if you really gave it to God, what's your life like? You're at peace. What else? It no longer consumes you. You don't dwell. You continue to pray about it. Yeah, you don't stress over it. When those thoughts come into your head, well, if I did this and did that, this might make it better. You don't do that. You gave it to God. Now, I want you to think about that. There's time in your life when you said, I gave these things to God, but yet it still consumed you. You ever been there? And all the while you're trying to tell yourself, but I gave it to God. No, you didn't. You didn't give it to God. Now, why didn't you give it to God? Why isn't there meekness? In order to get to meekness, what must you do first? Yeah, the first two. You got to become spiritually poor. You got to ask God, God, show me what you see so that I will know why these things are happening in my life. God, show me how I can handle it. All right, let me show you what you are, what you truly are. What you are without me. This is what's going on in your life. Then when you see it, then what? Yeah, because God's going to show it to you. If you mean it, God will show it to you, I promise. And you're not going to like what you see. And a lot of times you're going to see the situation you're in, that you caused it, and it was the sin in your life that's caused or led up to that. God's going to show you all those things. Now you're sorrowful because now who can fix it? And He will fix it if you're heartbroken over the fact that you sinned against Him in the first place. Why? Because He wants what's very best for you. Y'all remember last week I told you I believe that we're going to get to heaven one of these days and God's going to show us all these things that He had for us, but He couldn't give them to us. Why? Wouldn't allow Him. Stayed in the way all the time. Or we wanted to jump ahead. Understand something about God. God is a God of process. You always hear these sayings like going to school and say you're in science class and you're going to have a test the next day. What do you do the night before? You prepare. You study, right? So you can pass the test the next day. That is not how God works. So some of these preachers that you might hear that tell you that, they're wrong. God's going to give you the test first. And you learn the lesson as you go through it. Does that make sense? Isn't that how He works? Y'all remember Moses and how he said, he said, just let me know that you're going to go ahead of us, and if I can see you out in front of me, then I know that I can do this. I'll have faith that I can do this. What did God tell him? Moses, you ain't going to see me. You're not going to see me out in front of you. He said, but I guarantee you one thing. When you go do what I tell you to do, when you look behind, you're going to see me everywhere. That's faith. That's faith. And it takes faith to live this life that Jesus is talking about. And again, He's talking about how do we have our lives right with God. So God can do so much more. And it's all wrapped around humility, every bit of it. Again, I said it, well, I'll say it again. That's why God hates pride. How many times in the Bible does pride come up? You ever read what Solomon wrote in the Proverbs? How many Proverbs are about pride? You ever notice that? Peter, how many times does he write about pride? Mention pride. Well, he understood it. Solomon understood it. And what did they figure out? God hates it and it'll destroy your life. Don't do it. It'll keep you from being everything God wants you to be. It'll keep you from having a close relationship with God. And that's where the meekness comes from. I can see myself as God sees me. I can see that I've sinned against Him, and I don't like what I see. I am not what I thought I was. That's that meekness. And I need to be living under the authority of God. He needs to be in control because I keep messing everything up. Now, he goes from talking about getting our lives right with God to getting right inwardly and staying right. Because notice what he says next in verse 6. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Man, there's some good teaching right there on just on that. There's a bunch right there. Now, I want you to just think about what he's saying. And don't look at me. Look at the words that Jesus said. Blessed, happy, blessed, joyful, inward happiness, satisfied are those who hunger. But not only do they hunger, but they have a great thirst for righteousness. And he says, because they will be filled. He's talking about this desire that we have because of Jesus Christ in us. And we have this hunger, this thirst in our hearts. How many of you have ever been just outright just starving hungry? Besides Ryan. He's that way 23 hours out of 24. You ever just been so hungry? You say, man, I'd eat that carpet right there. I'm so hungry. How about thirsty? Anybody been just so thirsty he's like, man, if I don't get something to drink, I'm going to die. You ever been so thirsty you drink water out of a ditch? I have. I remember growing up, things were a lot different on the farm. When you drain rice, used to we had these metal gates. Y'all don't even remember metal gates, do you? Do you? You don't remember no metal gates? Boy, hush. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever put one in? Dug one out? Oh, that's heavy. And I mean, I'm 10 years old, 9, 10, out there digging them out. And I remember when we first started getting paper gates, man, but I remember being out there and draining rice and being so thirsty, we'd drink out of the bar ditches. If you've ever been in a rice field, there's green scum all over the top. You just go like that. And you can see them slicks swimming around in there. But you get so thirsty. So thirsty. You would. I'm not saying you just suck it all up, but you would just wet your mouth real good. That's thirsty. You ever been that way spiritually? Huh? Well, look at what he says. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And here comes the blessing. It's that what he says at the last part, for they shall be filled. Y'all know what that means? When Jesus said that, these people, they understood it. He was referring to a custom that day when you went to somebody's house. The Jews were very hospitable, extremely. So you would have somebody come to your house and they would invite you in. They would wash your feet, clean your feet, because your feet stink. And they're dirty from wearing them sandals. You would sit at their table and they would bring out a cup and then they would pour you a drink. And they would keep it full. Always filled. It's a great illustration of fellowship, of being welcome, and all these different things. And if your cup got halfway empty or was only halfway full, they'd make sure it stayed filled. And whenever it got ready for you to leave, they stopped filling it. I mean, all right, it's time for you to go. They didn't say that, but they just wouldn't put no more drink in your cup. You knew it was time for you. Hey. Get on. So if you come to my house and I bring out a cup and start filling it up, and I quit filling on it, it's time for you to go. But it's a picture of a close fellowship with God, and because all you do in your life is that you hunger and you thirst for more and more of Him. And I tell you, you see so many Christians today that are downtrodden, as the Bible would put it, or sad, or upset, or worried, all these different things. It's because they're not hungry and thirsting for righteousness. They don't have that desire in their heart to have a close relationship with God, an intimate relationship with God. Another thing I want to point out, this word righteousness here. In the Greek language, it's a direct object, is what they call it in the Greek language. Okay? And it actually means whole, the whole. Not H, but W-H-O-L-E. So, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for the whole of righteousness. You get it? Not just part of it. They don't want to just be halfway full, right? They want that cup always to be filled. I want the whole thing. I'm hungry and I'm thirsty for the whole thing, the whole of righteousness. In other words, I want to be everything that God desires for me to be. That's my hunger. That's my desire. I want to be everything. I want to be filled all the time. Now, how many people do you know are like that? Y'all know anybody? Y'all understanding what I'm saying? Y'all don't know anybody? Well, see, that's the problem. That's how we need to be. We need to become people like that. The whole of righteousness. Go ahead and tell them to come in. We'll stop right there. Is that a good place to stop? Remember that next week, what's whole mean? What does it mean, Ryan? You won't be here. Not the whole buffet on the ship. I said, man, I gotta eat that whole thing. He gonna whole hunger all week, isn't he? What? Is that why you're going? Tell your daddy I apologize.